Well, good morning. This is Barry Odell with the Church of Christ at Mammoth Spring Facebook page. It's Monday morning, January 30th, 2023. Hope everybody's doing well today. As you can see on the screen, we are in 1 Samuel chapter 16. And we're going to start talking about the life of David today. We spent a few days on Saul, looking at his life and his time as king. You know, Acts 13:21 tells us that he was king for 40 years in Israel, the first of their monarchs. And what we're doing here basically is just, you might say, kind of a character study, looking at how these individuals behaved, looking at the historical events that took place as recorded in Scripture, and what we can learn from it. You know, Israel had a king, a united kingdom for three kings: Saul, David, Solomon, about 120 years, approximately 1,000 years before Christ. And then after the death of Solomon, the kingdom splits. We're going to look at all of that. But all of this is important to our overall grasp, I would say, of Scripture, particularly of your Old Testament, but even into the New Testament. So, like, for instance, David, first time we read about David is in Ruth chapter 4. He is a descendant of Boaz and Ruth, ultimately a descendant of Judah. Jesus, of course, is of the tribe of Judah, Hebrews 7:14, and that's significant. But all of that, you can't separate any of that history, but also you cannot separate any of that history of like David and Solomon and then the kings that follow from the life of Christ itself. So all of this is important. But anyway, glad to have you today. Let's see who we've got here so far. Lyle, Gail, Lyle, Gail, Sheila, Anna, Jean, Janie, Diana, Norma. Good to see all of you guys, as always. And as always, we're cross-posted on the nearchurches.com Facebook page. And if you're watching, we always have some viewers over there too. If you're watching and have any questions or comments while we're going through this, feel free to add it to the comment section, and I will acknowledge it when I see it. All right, so like I said, the first time we read about David, his actual name is mentioned in Ruth chapter 4. Good morning, Sheila. Did God decide who the king would be for them all? It appears to be that way in the beginning. Saul was chosen. God told Samuel to go and anoint Saul. And then, well, we'll notice here in just a minute in regard to David, yes. And then Solomon. Once the kingdom splits, and we'll get to that, I may have a different answer for you. But let's just say for now, Saul, David, and Solomon, yes, God decided who the king would be. And to me, that really comes out here with David and some of the things we're going to read today in 1 Samuel chapter 16. Good question. First time we read about him, Ruth chapter 4. We don't read of David again until we get to 1 Samuel chapter 16. Of course, and obviously, 1 Samuel 16 follows 1 Samuel 15, where we have Saul's rebellion against God, his refusal to do what God told him to do in regard to the Amalekites, and specifically the destruction of that group of people. He spared Agag and the best of the animals, and the kingdom was torn away from him. You remember Samuel turned away to leave Saul behind, and as he turned away, Saul grabbed his outer garment. It tore, and Samuel said, that's kind of representative of what's going to happen with you. The kingdom's going to be taken, torn away from you, and given to someone better. Well, that someone better is David. Now, as you read the ending there of 1 Samuel 15, Samuel is mourning Saul because, well, he had anointed him. He's the first king. He's mourning over what's happened. And so as you open to 1 Samuel chapter 16, the Lord tells Samuel, how long do you mourn for Saul? I have rejected him. Okay, we need to move past this. Fill your horn with oil, as it says here in the text, 1 Samuel 16 and verse 1. I'm sending you to the house of Jesse, and I think, Sheila, this answers your question here. God says, I am sending you to the house of Jesse, the Bethlehemite, for I have provided myself a king from among his sons. And I actually have that underlined in my Bible. I have provided myself a king. So we have let me hide something here. We have someone asking for money. We're not going to we're not going to deal with that. And you guys have seen me do this on live videos before. These people come on here, they watch the video, and it's like they copy and paste the same comment. This has happened, they have this much money, they need this much more money. They give you a phone number. Don't fall for that stuff. I don't know if these are bots or what, but I hide the comments, and then after the stream's over, I delete them. We don't deal with that kind of stuff. Anyway, God provided for himself a king among the sons of Jesse. Well, Jesse has 8 sons, so it's interesting. There's a lot going on in all of these texts. My goal, like I did with Saul, is to focus on Saul. My goal now is to focus on David, not necessarily every single thing that happens recorded from 1 Samuel 16 through the end of 1 Samuel, let's say, because there are a lot of other individuals and a lot of other events that take place, but our focus solely is on David and his conduct and things like this. So you get down to 1 Samuel chapter 16 here, and verse 6, okay? Samuel is now at the house of Jesse, and he sees the oldest son, and he said, you notice the text says, Samuel, he looked at Eliab and said, surely the Lord's anointed is before him. And we have this then very well-known passage, and an important passage of Scripture here, 1 Samuel 16:7. Do not look at his appearance or at his physical stature, because I have refused him. For the Lord does not see as man sees, for man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. And I pointed out earlier in a previous lesson dealing with Saul that Saul was head and shoulders above everybody else. He was more handsome than anybody else. And it seems that's like a temptation to follow that trend. All right, he physically stands out among everybody. Everybody would recognize this individual. Well, that's not how God sees people. All right, he's not concerned about one's physical stature and appearance. It's kind of like, I think of, for instance, 1 Peter chapter 3, when Peter's talking about a believing woman who's married to a non-believing husband, and he talks about the hidden man of the heart, that is the great value before God. It's not the superficial considerations that humans tend to have, height, weight, appearance, things like this. So anyway, Jesse calls all of these sons, Eliab the first, and then Abinadab. No, he's not going to be it. And he goes through all of these sons. Verse 11, Samuel says to Jesse, are all the young men here? Is this all you've got to offer? Well, there's one more. He's out keeping the sheep. And of course, that turns out to be David. Verse 12, so he sent and brought him in. Now he was ruddy. That word ruddy appears a few times in your Old Testament. It was used in reference to, was it Jacob or Esau? Anyway, one of those two were described as ruddy, red, okay, perhaps red-haired, a red tint to them, something along those lines, bright-eyed, good-looking, and the Lord said, anoint him, for this is the one. So Samuel does that. The Spirit of the Lord came upon David from that day forward. And we talked about that, the Spirit of the Lord being with the king. We see that with Saul, and of course the Spirit of the Lord departed with Saul, but now David has been anointed, and the Spirit of the Lord comes upon David. And God's guidance, you might say, wisdom, etc., revelation, inspiration, we see all of that throughout the life of David. We see that through the lives of the kings. We notice that as well. But anyway, you then have the account where the distressing, and we dealt with this with Saul, so we're not going to go over it again, but the distressing spirit from the Lord comes to Saul. Well, David is the one who is, you might say, chosen or assigned to be with Saul to play an instrument. Okay, David, this son of Jesse the Bethlehemite, is skillful in playing, a mighty man of valor, a man of war, prudent in speech, handsome, and the Lord is with him. Okay, so that's another description of who David is as a person. Okay, mighty man of valor, man of war, prudent in speech, and all of that's going to kind of reappear several times, particularly in 1 Samuel chapter 18. We'll notice that here in just a minute. I don't know how far exactly I'm going to go today. We'll just see how it goes. So anyway, David is with Saul, and we know, like I said, I paid attention to this as I was dealing with Saul, so I'm not really going to spend a lot of time here, but you get to 1 Samuel chapter 17, of course, and you have the conflict between Israel and the Philistines, and Goliath. Of course, Goliath stands out in that chapter. David and Goliath is what we always think of. David at this point is, he's not, so far as we know, again, Jesse has these 8 sons, including David. 3 of those sons, notice here, 3 of the sons of Jesse were with Saul at that point in time. And notice here, 1 Samuel 17:13, the 3 oldest sons of Jesse had gone to follow Saul to the battle. Well, that's Eliab, Abinadab, and Shammah. So they're at least 20 years old. Well, David's not there. David's tending the sheep, and so most folks assume, as it says here, David was the youngest. He's under the age of 20. Most people estimate it 15 to 17, somewhere in that area. And so David is sent by his father to go check on what's happening with the battle. Take this bread. He's got some cheese. Take this to your brothers and just, kind of report back to me. Well, David, I'm looking at my Bible here. He gets there, beginning down in verse 20. Scroll down here to verse 20. He arose early in the morning. He did exactly what his dad told him to do. Israel and the Philistines had drawn up in battle array, army against army. David sees all this. Okay. He hears Goliath. All the Israelites hear Goliath. They're all afraid. What shall be done, this is David, for the man who kills the Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? And that's what kind of spurs the rest of this text on, is David's reaction to what he sees and hears. All of Israel, including Saul, and including his 3 older brothers, David's older brothers, they're all afraid of this, as David calls him, this uncircumcised Philistine who's defying the armies of God. And so you keep reading through the text here. Get down to verse, I'll tell you what, I'll just scroll down here to verse 28, right in the neighborhood. Eliab, David's oldest brother, heard when he spoke to the men, and Eliab's anger was aroused against David. And he said, "Why did you come down here?" Well, the answer to that question is, well, Dad sent me. Okay. "With whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness?" Notice what Eliab, he insults him here. David he's been angered, you might say, by what he sees and hears from Goliath, and he wants something to be done about it. Whoever does it, he wants something done. And so his older brother, and I can see brothers doing this. I've got an older brother. I know how the brother thing works. Why don't you go back to your little flock out in the wilderness? Leave this to the men. I know your pride and the insolence of your heart, for you've come down to see the battle. You're just curious. You should be at home doing what you're supposed to be doing. And David asks the right question. What have I done? Is there some reason you're speaking to me like this? And he asks this question here in 1 Samuel 17:29. Is there not a cause? Isn't there something that you guys should be standing up for instead of cowering in fear over here? Well, so he turns away from him toward another and said the same thing. Isn't there a cause? And these people answered him as the first ones did. What are you doing here, kid? Again, David would be under the age of 20, among all these guys who are trained soldiers. Okay, Saul's army here. So David, well, I want to go fight this Philistine. He's talking to Saul at this point. You're not able to do that. And notice what Saul says. Saul says the exact same thing that Eliab said to him. You're but a youth, and he, Goliath, has been a man of war from his youth. All right, he has more experience in fighting than you have in life itself. And so you need to go on, basically. And then David gives this account of being a shepherd and how he had killed a lion and a bear. And, well, that says something about David's character and about his capabilities, about his courage, about his strength. And so, I've killed both a lion and a bear. What's this Philistine to me? And especially the fact that he's defying the armies of the living God. And so you see the faith of David. This is not just David's ego. This is not David just saying, I've killed these other things, I can kill this guy by myself. He understands, you might say, the source of his strength. He's defied the armies of the living God. Okay, that's key in understanding the battle here, if you want to call it a battle, ultimately between David and Goliath, is David's faith in God. And again, verse 37, the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear, he'll deliver me from the hand of the Philistine. I can defeat him. And Saul, okay, this is the king of Israel, who's afraid with the rest of the Israelites. Go and the Lord be with you. Well, I don't quite know what to make of that. What exactly does Saul think will happen? I don't know, but that's what he says to David. Go and the Lord be with you. Saul suits him up in his own armor. David, I've never tested this. I can't wear this. And so just let me go. And of course, this is where David, let's see here, verse 40, he took his staff in his hand. He chose for himself 5 smooth stones from the brook, and he put them in a shepherd's bag. Well, he's a shepherd, so that makes sense. In a pouch which he had, and his sling was in his hand, and he drew near the Philistine. So David has received scorn from his brother and from the people that were right around. He received it from Saul. Now he's going to get it from the Philistine. Okay, verse 41. The Philistine comes out, and, he looked and saw David, and he disdained him, for he was only a youth, ruddy and good-looking. So the Philistine said to David, am I a dog? You going to treat me like an animal, that you come to me with sticks? Making fun of him. You come on, and I'll kill you. Let's get this over with. Notice David's response here. 1 Samuel 17:45. You come to me with a sword and a spear and a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts. So David is not, again, this phrase here in verse 45. Everybody's looking at this, so far as I can tell so far, Saul, Eliab, all of David's brothers, and all of the army of Israel, they're looking at this simply as a physical confrontation. David comes on the scene, and he sees all that's going on. Is there not a cause, Israel? Isn't there something that you guys should be standing up for? This Philistine's defying God himself. And that's what we see here again, as now he's communicating with Goliath. I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. For David, this is not just about Goliath and the Philistines insulting Israel. It's about God and how, again, this Gentile, this uncircumcised Philistine is insulting not just the armies of God, but God himself with what he's been saying. And so that's how he takes this. You get to 1 Samuel 17:47. The battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands. Again, David speaking out of faith. He knows this is not just with him. It's not just with the smooth stones and the sling that he has with him. The battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands. And of course, we know what happens. David takes one stone, slings it, kills Goliath. David then takes Goliath's sword and cut his head off, and takes his armor, takes his sword, takes his head, and goes back to Israel. Of course, the Philistines see this, and they take off. They're pursued by the Israelites, etc. So, it's not just about the battle here in 1 Samuel chapter 17. It's about David's display of his faith in God, the display of David's faith in God for the Philistines to see, but also for the Israelites to see. And that's kind of the basis of David's question back in what verse was it? Verse 29. Is there not a cause? He said that to his brother. shouldn't you guys be standing up for the Lord and for his cause? And you're just, you're cowering over here in fear. Well, you turn to 1 Samuel chapter 18, and this is where Jonathan starts to come into the picture. Saul's son. The soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. Well, he saw David's faith that day in the action that David took, but he also saw the inaction and the fear of his dad and his dad's armies. That's going to be a sticking point for the rest of, let's say for the rest of Jonathan's life, because Jonathan is obviously going to die before David does. But not only is that the case, but you might say it's also a sticking point for Saul, because Saul knows that Jonathan has regard for David and that they have a strong relationship based on what David has done here. So they come home. Now this is key. Note, and this is actually said 3 times here in 1 Samuel chapter 18. Now think about what David's just done here, okay? In front of the whole army of Israel. He's killed the greatest threat, Goliath, but the death of Goliath also led to the flight of the Philistines, the Israelites chasing after them and killing many Philistines. Well, what do you think a typical young man who kind of comes up out of nowhere, defeats a great enemy, and now he's being praised? Remember 1 Samuel 18 and verse 7, the women singing, Saul has slain his thousands and David his 10,000s. Well, what might happen to a young man who kind of has that, as it's been called sometimes, a meteoric rise to fame? Arrogance, conceit. It could, as we say, go to his head. Okay? But notice here, and again, this is emphasized 3 times in 1 Samuel chapter 18. David went out wherever Saul sent him and behaved himself wisely. That's not insignificant. Okay? So again, I'm going to show you how it continues here. Saul slain his thousands, David his 10,000. And you'll remember we talked about this with Saul, so we're not going to spend a lot of time on it with David. This displeased him, and he eyed David from that day forward. Okay? Well, then we get down to verse 14, 1 Samuel 18. And David behaved wisely in all his ways, and the Lord was with him. That's important. Saul saw that, verse 15, and he was afraid of him. So David, the text tells us that back in chapter 16, David has already been chosen and anointed as the next king of Israel. Now he's defeated this great enemy. Now the women are praising him. 1 Samuel 18:16, all Israel and Judah loved David because he went out and came in before them. Okay, he's been sent out on various assignments by Saul. He's succeeding. And he's behaving himself wisely throughout all of that. Not only that, he becomes Saul's son-in-law. He marries Michal. 1 Samuel 18:20, Michal, Saul's daughter, loved David. So think about that. Saul is already envious of David, but Saul's son Jonathan loves David. Now Saul's daughter loves Jacob. All of Israel and Judah love David because of this. It's like I said it. I think I said it the other day. The deck is stacked against Saul. But really it has to do with Saul's own behavior and David's behavior. Saul has shown a constant willingness to rebel against God, and David has shown a constant willingness to obey God, to display his faith in God, but also to faithfully serve Saul. So Saul's family's in a sense, against Saul, because they've aligned themselves with David. But David, even with all of his success and his rise to fame, let's say, he behaves himself wisely, verse 14. You get down to 1 Samuel 18, verse 30. Then the princes of the Philistines went out to war, and so it was whenever they went out that David behaved more wisely than all the servants of Saul, so that his name became highly esteemed. Saul's already on the decline. We've already noticed that. And David's on the rise. It's not just about the armies of Israel seeing that. It's Saul's son Jonathan. It's Saul's daughter Michal, who's now married to David and loves David. All of this is playing together. And in the midst of all of that, the biblical text repeatedly says David behaved himself wisely, and Saul saw that. He recognized what was going on here. So in these 3 chapters, 1 Samuel 16, 17, and 18, you kind of see Saul's downward trend and David's upward trend. And the Lord is with David. Gene says Saul did seem to have a love-hate relationship with David. Yeah, there's no question about that, because again, he's during this time when the spirit departs Saul and the distressing spirit is with Saul, David is serving him throughout that whole time already. And he's behaving himself wisely. And everybody now is looking up to David. Everybody. So that's, you would have to think, that's weighing on Saul this whole time. Because technically you might say he is still king, although David has already been chosen to succeed him. So then we get to 1 Samuel chapter 19, and I don't want to get in this today. We'll just go ahead and cut it off here. We'll stop. So 3 chapters. One's on the decline, one's on the incline, and it all has to do with their own personal behavior. And I would say also David's faith in God and Saul's lack of faith in God. I think 1 Samuel 17 not only shows, with Goliath, I think that chapter not only shows, obviously, David's faith in God. Okay? The Lord that delivered the lion and the bear to me, he will also deliver this Philistine to me. It shows that, but it also shows Saul's lack of faith. David's faith, Saul's lack of faith. And again, that's in line with the decline of Saul and the rise of David. All of that plays together. Diana says Saul was all about himself from the beginning, and that was something he could never get over. I think that's exactly right. And if you remember that we looked at last week, 1 Samuel chapters 10, 11, and 12, Saul didn't start off that way, but he went that way, and when he went that way, he went there quickly and never recovered. And that just continues to play out until he dies in 1 Samuel 31. Anyway, that was something he'd never get over. He always chose himself over everyone and God and his will, God's will. Yes, absolutely. And David was the exact opposite of that. And again, Saul saw that, Jonathan, Michal, all of Israel and Judah, that was evident to all of them. And that plays itself out. Power seems to do that to people. No question there. Yep. All right, guys. Well, I'm glad you're here today. I hope you come back tomorrow. We'll pick up in 1 Samuel chapter 19, and we'll kind of breeze through the next several chapters, because the next several chapters are David's being pursued by Saul, and frankly, there's not a lot of comment to be made. It's just a historical narrative, and so we'll kind of move through the text. All right, guys. Well, thank you for being here today. I appreciate it. Appreciate the comments and the greetings. Hope you guys have a good day. For those of us here in northern Arkansas, we got some nasty weather coming our way, so y'all stay safe. And hope to see you back here tomorrow at 11.